So as of patch 14.4, League released a new limited game mode called Swarm, and I did something no one else has done. I beat the mode on its highest difficulty with every single character. Now that sounds easy to you, because with animal power-ups it is easy. But what if you had no animal power-ups? Is it even possible? Wait, it's been how long now? Ah shit. Now before I start, I think I should explain what Swarm even is. Swarm is a top-down PvE mode where you fight endless hordes of enemies by yourself or with your friends, getting stronger the more enemies you kill, eventually fighting the final boss of each stage. Every character you play has unique abilities and requires different builds to reach their full potential. So the goal is to make use of what you get every time you level up to reach an ideal power level to fight the boss and win the game. This particular challenge will be looking at extreme difficulty on the last stage where the boss is Aatrox, a boss with two phases that play completely differently and require different strategies. I'll be using all the base power-ups maxed except Anima Power, as I feel that it is what's intended, and Anima Power is mainly to make it easier for casuals. Before I begin, I had to try if this challenge was even possible from the start. So unfortunately, there won't be a Xayah section because I beat Extreme Aatrox with her off screen. So she is technically the first champ I cleared it with. As you'll see, my progress started with Xayah's clear already in place. I felt she was the strongest character in the game, so if she could do it, maybe the others could as well. Starting off, I have to tell you about the multiple checks in this stage. The Seahorse, which is the first mini-boss to spawn, the exploding mobs that spawn around 7 minutes, and the frogs which make the area it dies in damage you for a few seconds. And finally, the DPS check on Aatrox. To tackle these checks, I have to bring up the two MVP weapons for my runs. The Uwu Blaster, or short form I'll just call it U Blaster, and Ice Blast Armor. The U Blaster has the single highest damage per second on a single target, making it the best at killing bosses and giving everyone a reliable way to get rid of the exploders safely. Meanwhile, the Ice Blast Armor is the best defensive weapon in the game, blocking one instance of damage no matter how high it is, freezing mobs near you allowing you to move freely for a while, and when it gets evolved, it gives you a shield, which basically means another instance of damage blocked. Most of my builds will have these two weapons inside, so I figured I would just explain them now. Now that I've explained how the challenge will go, let's begin with the first character. Jinx is the character everyone can start with and is meant to be the easiest to play. She's the typical damage carry that rewards you for killing enemies with a passive that gives her increased movement speed and ability haste, which is basically attack speed and cooldown combined together. Her basic attack is very good at single target damage, making her good at taking down bosses, but it does mean her area damage is a bit lacking, so that's what this build will be focusing on. I start out with getting Ramming Rudder, which is easily the best augment for most characters, giving damage accordingly to how much movement speed bonuses you get, which turns the movement speed stat into both a defensive and an offensive stat. And as Jinx, who gets insane movement speed from her passive, it is a huge spike in damage. The Seahorse is easily melted, but I almost lost the run midway, a Bel'Veth Trial, and a Horrible Boon. Due to some bad luck, I used up all my rerolls and had to pick some unconventional weapons, but they were good in AoE, so it was still fine. Afterwards, I picked up Larger Than Life for defense, and with Haste, which is perfect synergy, then it was smooth sailing to the boss. Now, here is something that not a lot of players abuse. You can actually continue farming for XP while fighting Aatrox, usually enough for you to max everything, which is why you see I don't use the XP stat for my runs, yes, even on the Aurora run. However, you don't do this forever for two reasons. Either you'll kill Aatrox through chipping, or he'll kill you because he has a time window before he instantly ends the game. Phase 1 ends with no problem and Phase 2 begins. At first, I thought it would be fine until I lost half my health while Aatrox isn't half. It ended up being extremely close and I could have lost if it wasn't for the passive proc I got last minute. 2 down, a lot more to go. Next is Seraphine, who might look like a support at first, but her passive giving her the chance to shoot twice the amount of projectiles basically means she doubles her damage every time she attacks. Her skill gives her movement speed and a shield, while her ult stuns everything on the field and grants her 3 seconds of invulnerability, making her quite hard to kill for a damage dealer. The main issue is her early game. Without max attack speed and low damage on her basic attacks, she can struggle to kill some enemies, so Seahorse is going to be a problem. But it isn't. I also did not mention that her basic attack slows enemies on hit. This includes bosses. Combining the slow and her shield, Seahorse becomes a lot easier to kill. I pick up Pescatarian to help my early game, get Ramming Runner and Point Blank. Now we get to Aatrox, which is actually quite simple. The hardest part is dodging the swords flying around the map. But with her insane movement speed, she can easily kite Aatrox. Although I almost died due to a major mistake, but with a good ult I was able to avoid throwing the game. Leona, on the other hand, is the main tank of this game mode, and my concern was being able to do enough damage. Her skill gives her a shield that damages nearby enemies, and her ult stuns the surrounding area and burns the ground for a few seconds. Both of these aren't exactly ideal skills to have, and with a mediocre basic attack that is extremely slow, I thought she would be one of the hardest characters to clear with. However, it actually only took me one try to do it. I did go for a more tankier build and get 2 very strong augments. Picking up Armor Up is probably Leona's best augment due to her kit scaling very well with armor. Then I had Ramming Runner, which is always good, and probably the damage I needed to beat Aatrox in time. My third augment was Pescatarian because the other 2 wouldn't help me with Aatrox at all. When I got to Aatrox, he could barely hurt me at all. Having Deep Freeze combined with her own shield and armor up basically meant it was near impossible to kill me, even when I made major mistakes in my positioning. With that down, there was 5 left. Next is Briar, who is a little bit tricky to play as she plays pretty much the same as the Summoner's Rift counterpart. Now you must be thinking, wait a minute, isn't Illaoi the next character? Well, we'll get to her later. I have many things to say about the Illaoi run. Briar's skill puts her into a frenzy state, which makes her target the closest enemy to her and gives her a ton of damage reduction and lifesteal. The lower health she has, the bigger the lifesteal. To the point, she can match if not out-heal the damage she takes when coming into contact with bosses. Her ult is basically the same thing, putting her into a frenzy state for longer. So the ideal play is to use a skill first, then ult, and your skill is back up again, allowing her to face tank bosses for a good 20 or so seconds while they soak up all the damage coming from you directly. So weapons that come out from all sides around you benefit a lot from this. Another benefit is that her kit scales off HP, so naturally building her will make her both stronger and tankier with no sacrifices. I expected the run to be pretty easy, but I didn't know that I would start off with one of the most annoying moments I have experienced. The Seahorse actually counters Briar's kit, especially early on. If you want to do damage, you have to use your skill, which naturally means you have to go into melee range. However, this means the Seahorse gets to knock you back, eating up your frenzy time and most importantly, causing you to target other enemies while it's stunned. This was super annoying since it meant it was a constant game of cat and mouse. In fact, all 3 checks were super annoying for Briar. The Exploders were a full Briar counter as she has to go into their range to kill them, and in Extreme, they hurt a lot more than you can heal, pretty much forcing you Blaster to be mandatory for Briar. The Frogs that die counter Briar as well, as when you are in a frenzy state, you enter their death zone and can't escape out of it unless you end your frenzy, making the overall mobs a nightmare compared to the bosses and even Aatrox. Luckily, I do pick up cross country at the start, which Briar benefits greatly from, get heavy hitter, and a useless augment for Aatrox. But I already have more than enough to safely beat Aatrox. I didn't even get to pick movement speed for my last stat due to bad RNG, and picked area size as well as miss out on evolving my radiant field, but all those were not needed as we see a very comfortable clear on Aatrox. Moving on to the remaining characters. Yasuo is regarded as the best character in the game. However, I don't think so for a couple of reasons. Yasuo has one of the weakest early game since his basic attack is not very strong until it evolves, and for this stage, surviving the early phases is quite hard. His ability is just a simple dash that makes you immune for a while and grants you a shield that is borderline useless because dashing into an enemy to deal damage makes you lose the shield immediately from taking damage half the time. His ultimate is just his wind wall, except enemies can't cross through it. It sounds overpowered, but it does not work on bosses, and in cases where you do need to avoid projectiles, you should be moving away from them anyways, since Yasuo needs you to move majority of the time. I should mention that relying on misfortune on the early game is more or less necessary for characters like these, since she gives that early burst for more XP and some chip on bosses. So we can see from the start, Yasuo can actually handle Seahorse well with his dash shield absorbing his charge. I pick up a crucial cross country which gives me the necessary tank stats for the boss fight. However, I ended up in a tough Bel'Veth trial which I had to fail, or else I would have died, and this would drag on to me not even having the third trial to spawn, which is a huge loss of about 6 levels, but I still continued. When the exploders came during my second Yuumi quest, I almost died due to my U-Blaster not being high enough to take them out fast enough. With a Seahorse right on me, I was almost certain I would have died. I picked up a last minute larger than life and had my Ice Blast come out right in time to clutch out of that situation. My last augment would be Ramming Runner, which in hindsight, I should have picked movement speed over projectile count to make use of it and have some speed to run away. We get to Aatrox and I'm super behind my levels, so I tried to drag out the fight to farm extra, but as long as I had this evolved, I always had enough single target damage. Now this is where Yasuo really shines. Being able to wind wall the swords and you can actually dash to become invulnerable and dodge his big attacks as you can see, but I did get a little complacent near the end and nearly died, but we still managed to push through. We get to Riven, who I was pretty confident in clearing since I played her the most. She's easily the best at clearing out hordes of enemies while being equally unkillable. She was quite simple to understand but difficult to play. Move to attack in an area around her, the more enemies that will hit, the bigger shield she gets. Her skill lets her dash and stun surrounding enemies, and her ult makes her faster and she shoots projectiles. Seahorse was my biggest hurdle, but that was quickly settled by getting the best boon. I get critical expansion, which was not necessary for the boss, but it was nice to have nonetheless. Ramming Runner is easily what I'm looking for, and that is why I get my second augment, more or less securing the run. However, I get some bad luck and miss out on getting ability haste on my stats, preventing me from evolving my U-Blaster, which is a big damage loss. I pick up Point Blank to try to make up as much damage loss as I could, and we begin on Aatrox. The biggest issue with Riven is once her ult is over, she loses a lot of her burst damage on bosses, and you have to wait a very long time for it to come back. And missing that ability haste stat, I had to wait even longer. But still, it was super easy to kite Aatrox, and he could barely touch me. I did make quite a big mistake, but the combination of a shield, Ice Blast, and the boots, I had such a big shield that it was more than my health at times. Having mob spawn was also helpful in giving me a bigger shield, and by the second out, I was able to kill him. All that's left are the two weakest characters in the game. Aurora is regarded by people as the weakest, though I don't think that's necessarily the case. Her kit revolves around getting XP as is needed to evolve her basic attack, and her passive gets stronger the more levels she has. But what if you don't use the XP stat? Her basic attack casts projectiles you can move with your mouse to deal damage while marking enemies. On her third cast, she deals extra damage to all marked enemies. Her passive gives her pets that marks enemies for you. Both of these aren't super strong and can still function without the XP stat. Her ability allows her to go invulnerable and gain a lot of movement speed for a few seconds, damaging enemies she goes through. This is her best ability by far, which allows her to actually be quite strong for Aatrox. Her ult makes an arena where she can bounce around the sides, knocking up whatever she passes through, but it is very clunky and does not guarantee you don't take damage, compared to other ultimates. Beforehand, I actually didn't unlock some of the augments, which at least for Aurora, was necessary. I picked up Experienced Fighter, which worked well with a kit, and is super strong for early game. get hit with a horrible trial and almost died, but with a very last minute clutch, I do get it and stay alive, one hit away from possibly hours of tries. Pick up long range and bullet mania for DPS, and then it's surprisingly smooth sailing to Aatrox. As you can see, Aatrox can barely touch me, and with max ability haste, Aurora's skill is only down for 9 seconds, and I easily kite him even though my damage is barely on pace. With a last ditch effort to use my ult, I managed to beat Aatrox with what people call the worst character. But now we are left with the actual worst character in the game, and that's Illaoi. Illaoi is a tank that relies on her tentacles to do damage. Her attack summons one on a spot that stays for a while like a turret. Her skill knocks up in front of her, leaving a tentacle at the tip, and her ult spawns a lot of them for a moment, giving her crazy health regen because her passive gives her health regen based on how many tentacles are around her. But there are several problems with this. The tentacles are unreliable as you can't control who they target. The game forces you to move around the map even though you want to stay at the same spot to build up more tentacles. Early on, her damage is terrible even if we exclude the last 2 points. But even in late game, her tentacles don't do a lot of damage except during her ultimate. And as you have seen from Aatrox, you have to move or you die, making Illaoi's entire kit useless against Aatrox. So how was I going to do this with such a bad character for solo? Well, I tried a bunch of different builds, starting with a pet build, which is what should be designed for her, but ends up causing me the most trouble. Tibbers has amazing damage, but his targeting is horrendous. One time I lost because Tibbers attacked the invulnerable Aatrox instead of his pillars, causing me to not have enough damage and die. The rabbit blasters are unreliable as well, since you can't really control where they aim. Both these weapons don't crit as well, and require you to get a pet augment to really do something. I tried the regular crit build, but I would always die early since they have a weak early game, and I was still too squishy for Aatrox. In the end, I tried a tank build, but it didn't even go correctly. I did pick up cross country and armor up, which I couldn't have asked for better. Then I pick up circle stats. Seahorse is a pain in the ass as well as the exploders, but with some boons I managed to pull through. Now Aatrox has started and I don't have my last weapon evolved, which is a problem since it was one of my core damage weapons. Surprisingly, I was able to have enough damage to destroy Aatrox's pillars. Now for phase 2, and we get to see the strength of cross country, increasing my max health to absurd levels. The plan was straightforward. Stall Aatrox till he does his triple attacks, and out to deal as much damage as I could. Then repeat this process. I had to make sure he does not do his map wide smashes, since I doubt I could dodge them with Illaoi easily. After a super long fight, Aatrox finally goes down, and I have become the Swarm Conqueror. Afterwards, I did a celebratory upgrade for my anima power, knowing that I was done with this challenge that I had no reason doing, by the way. But finally, after non-stop grinding and finding the right builds for every character, studying the enemies and bosses and a bit of luck, I can finally say that I have done something that no other League player has ever done. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'm gonna take a break from League for a while.